Welcome back to the table. Today we are taking a look at Verdant. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. This one is from Flatout Games. It's a 1 to 4 player puzzly game where you're going to be drafting tokens, plants, and rooms and building out effectively a house full of plants. And hopefully all those plants are getting the type of light that they want.
Yeah, like David said, this is a puzzle game. Of course, Flatout Games is kind of making a name for themselves in that puzzle genre with games like Calico and Cascadia that had you placing out tiles and cards in very specific ways. This game is no different in that aspect, that you're going to be drafting cards and really trying to have to think carefully about where you place them in this 5x3 grid. Effectively, what you're doing is taking plants and putting them in rooms. Like David said, each room provides a different amount of sunlight, and you're wanting each of these plants to get a specific type of sunlight. It sounds like it's a very simple thing, but the way that you're drafting these cards makes the puzzle come to life and really leads to some interesting decisions.
Yeah, and there's some mitigation too with some of these decisions. You can collect some tokens to wash some tiles, potentially use some powers that you wouldn't normally be able to use. But let's take a look at what we have here. First of all, we kind of have our end game set up right here. We just played again, and this is our finished 3x5 grid. Ryan has one too. Out here, though, you will see what the general setup is. You're going to have some plant cards in a little row here, and then some room cards down here. And then in between, you're going to have these item tokens which come out of this bag. Those tokens can range from items or plants that you would decorate your house with to items that you can use to nurture the plants, including like fertilizer or a hand trowel, and I think there's a water can as well. These are going to be the things that you draft during your turn, during the game. Other than that, you're going to see these tokens here, which are key to the game. This is verdancy. As you put rooms around the plants or plants around the rooms, you're going to be adding verdancy to these cards, hopefully trying to complete these plants and then putting some pots on them to score points. But that's effectively all of the components you're going to see here, and we are playing with a variant, which is sort of the advanced mode that has some scoring cards. There's 3 different levels of scoring cards, and there's a little deck of each of those, so it's going to be different every game.
Yeah, I would always use those if I was playing, to be honest.
For an enthusiast gamer, for sure, you're going to want to use those. They're not terribly complicated, but it's nice for a game like this to have a mode that's sort of the base mode for just about anyone to play.
So the drafting in this game is, like David said, based on these columns and rows here. And you're going to see that these are situated with 4 in each column, and there's a reason for that. On your turn, you're always drafting one tool, and then you're going to be either drafting the plant or the room card that's from that same column. So you're either taking the bottom 2 or you're taking the top 2. And of course, there's a lot of things that are going to factor into this decision as to why you might choose one or the other. Each room is going to provide a different amount of sunlight based on which wall you're up against, and each plant is going to require a different amount of sunlight. And this is kind of the key to the game, because the more sunlight a plant gets, the more verdancy tokens it gets. If you can hit the required number of verdancy tokens on a card, then you'll score the correct amount of victory points at the end of the game. That's a lot of points. A lot of your points are going to come from completing those plants, so you want to make sure that they're being paired up with rooms. So when you're drafting and placing cards in your grid, you really need to pay attention to where your sunlight's going, and if your plants that are adjacent really need that sunlight.
Yeah, and another thing you have to keep in mind when you take or draft those cards and tokens, the card that you leave in that column is going to get one of these green thumb tokens. You can already see some out on some of these. So if Ryan were to take these, he'd not only get a green thumb token, but he'd have to leave one on this plant. And then also keep in mind, whenever you take a card, you're going to be placing that card in your house that turn. And you have to place within that 3x5 grid, plus adjacent to cards that you've already placed, plus it has to be in a checkerboard pattern. In other words, you can't have a plant orthogonally adjacent to another plant or a room right next to a room. So it's going to be a checkerboard, because you want rooms surrounding those plants if at all possible, because like Ryan said, the more rooms you have around a plant that has the right sunlight, the more verdancy that plant is naturally going to get, because when you place it in your tableau, you're going to add verdancy tokens to the appropriate cards depending on how that card affected your house.
Yeah, and of course the most verdancy you're going to be able to add to a single card is probably 4 if you can get it surrounded on all 4 sides with the right kind of light. So in order to get some of these bigger plants to reach maturity to get that verdancy, you're going to have to use these tools. And these tools are going to manipulate your board in different ways. They're going to add a bunch of verdancy to one plant. They're going to let you spread it out across the board. You have to manipulate these tokens. Some of these cards need 7, 8, or even 9 verdancy to be completed. So drafting these is also important, but sometimes you don't necessarily want to draft the tool. Maybe you want a card that doesn't have a tool in that column. And that's a really difficult decision. Now, like David said, there is mitigation. You can turn in some of those green thumbs to just take whatever tool you want and whatever card you want. But if you don't have them, you kind of have to make the best of what you've got. And that's the core of the game, is not trying to plan out the perfect house. It's seeing what's available, seeing what's on your board, and trying to score the most points with what you can make as far as what you can see.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's strategy in this game for sure, but also quite a bit of tactical gameplay, because you're going to want to seize the opportunity like Ryan just said. And speaking of those opportunities, we want to describe the cards a little bit more. We've described how the rooms work for the most part, but one other thing that you're going to notice on these room cards, there's a space for one of the tokens. Now this is a space for not any of the green tokens, so those tools or those nurturing items are not going to be placed here. But the house items, the decorations, and the pets will be placed here. And what you're going to want to do is to try to get tokens of a matching color to place in there, because the other thing on this card is at the bottom, you're going to see a room bonus scoring here. Now, if you don't have a token or a token of the wrong color, at the end of the game, you're going to get 1 point for each plant around this room that is the same type or same color as this room. However, if you have the right token on there, that's going to be increased by 1, so you're going to get 2 points. So you could potentially get 8 points with the right room and the right plants, although that's a lot of successful drafting.
That is a lot of successful drafting, and it's a lot of timing, and it's a lot of making the right decision, because if you decide maybe you're not going to go for that particular blue plant and you block off a section, and then next thing you know, blue plant comes up, maybe you regret making that, maybe you should have waited a little bit. And also trying to match these tiles to the right color. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to do so. You're just going to have to put these on a room, even though it's not going to score you maximum points. But you do get a set collection bonus for having all of the different types of furniture and pets at the end of the game. So it's just that balance there. Like, you're not, if you're drafting these colored tokens, you're not drafting the green tokens. You're not giving verdancy to your plants, but you are going for that set collection. You are potentially boosting some of your cards to make them worth 2 points instead of 1. This is just a lot of those decisions are going to factor into what you're doing tactically on your turn.
Yeah, and if you think all of that sounds puzzly enough, there's more. Because you can only hold one item from turn to turn. So, like Ryan said, you're going to be putting some of those items on your cards, on the rooms out here. But those nurturing items, like the fertilizer and the hand troll, if you don't want to use those right now, you can place them on this card, but you only have one space for any token from turn to turn. So at the end of your turn, any tokens that you haven't placed or any tokens that you haven't used, you can only hold one over. So it makes it even that much more challenging, because some of those tokens, the way they work, you might have a token like the watering can that adds 1 verdancy to every plant around a single room. But what if your room, your house doesn't have a lot of plants around a single room at that point? You want to hold on to that, but then the next turn you might get another one, and you're kind of like, I kind of need to use that watering can now, even though I'm not going to use it to its maximum efficiency.
Or if you're trying to hold out to match an item with the exact room color. Maybe you're waiting for a specific room tile to come up, in which case you're trying to grab that room. Of course, that's going to give you another item that maybe you may or may not use. So there's just a lot of decisions that you're going to have to make during this game, but almost everything you do scores points. This is definitely kind of a point salad game. When the game ends, which means that both players will have completed their 15 card grid, you're really scoring everything. You're scoring all of the points for plants you've completed. If you score plants early enough, you'll get special pots that score more points. You're going to get points for the sets that you've collected. You're going to get points for your rooms. You're going to get points for those in-game scoring tiles. There's a lot of points.
Yeah, and to cap off the scoring, you're going to get points if you've collected one of each type of plant at least once in your house, which again, you'll notice goes against some of the other things you're trying to do. And one of each type of room if it's in your house. You can get a maximum of 3 points for each of those categories. The one thing that you're going to get the most points for, like Ryan said earlier, are those plants, though. And when we kind of glossed over this, but as you're adding verdancy to these plants, take a look at one of these cards. You're going to see the plant type up in the upper left-hand corner, but up in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see 2 numbers. One of those is the verdancy number. This is the one in the green leaf. As soon as there are 3 verdancy, for example, on this card, you're going to be able to effectively close out this card. You're going to remove the verdancy tokens from it and take the highest value pot that's available and place that on there. Now, the pots are 3 points, 2 points, 1 point, and then there's these pots that are 0 points. So the sooner you can get some of these done, the better. And again, these plants range for anywhere from 3 points all the way up to, I think, 8, maybe more. I think 8's maybe the highest one I've seen.
I had a 9-point plant.
Oh, you had a 9-point
I did have a 9-point plant. So, yeah, it's a matter of course, those higher verdancy plants are harder to complete. So, again, just one more decision. So, I guess if you're going to take anything away from this game, it is the amount of decisions, because you're always balancing those things as to trying to figure out what is going to score you the most points. A bunch of small plants that are easy to complete, allowing you to get other items, or you're going for those a few point plants that are really huge, that require a lot of like fertilizer to grow. I mean, you can have ultimately whatever kind of strategy you want, but it's going to be modified by how these cards come out.
Yeah, and then finally, the optional thing, this variant for the advanced play, throws another wrench into the gearworks because, for instance, these green thumbs that you collect and use to do a variety of different things to sort of mitigate things in the game, we had a card in our last play that also gave you a point for all of those green thumbs you had at the end of the game. So it's just another decision. Do I spend my green thumbs? Because as I do, and you typically have to spend 2 at a time to do any of those powers, you're giving up 2 points in this game, for example.
Right.
But whereas in my next game, maybe that card's not out there, so the green thumbs are going to move back and forth quite a bit more.
Yeah, and you might get lucky that the in-game cards are kind of synergizing with what you're trying to do, or you might have to decide one or the other. Either way, you're trying to score points however you can. So if you're a fan of puzzly games, or you like the kind of games that Flatout Games has made in the past, especially like Cascadia, which just released, which is a great game. A lot of people are talking about that. Then you're definitely going to want to follow up on this one.
Yeah.
Check out the Kickstarter page to see what it's going to look like as far as all the final components. We have a prototype here. I mean, this is a good-looking prototype.
It is. I mean, it's a card game with some tokens, and it has a nice bag and some wooden tokens for the verdancy. I don't know how much all of this is going to be at various levels in the Kickstarter. But you're going to definitely want to check out the Kickstarter for more information. And feel free to ask any questions below. We'll try to answer them if we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.